Hello and welcome back to episode 2 of White Rose Resistance Radio. And today we're going to do a very brief overview, or at least the first half of Italian dictator Benito Mussolini. The script started getting super long, so it's going to be a two-parter. We'll cover the pre-World War I period in this episode and World War I, and then we'll do World War II and how it all ended up next time. I'd like to start by giving a bit of background on Italy. Italy became a united country in 1861. The country had been divided basically since the fall of Rome. Some regions were controlled by local city-states like Florence and Venice that were republics. Others were ruled by foreign powers such as Spain and France. A lot of the central region was part of the Papal States, so that was controlled by the Pope. Italy was a mix of republics and monarchies and theocracy until it unified in 1861. So, who is Benito Mussolini? He was the first fascist. He coined the term fascism. Mussolini was born in Dovia di Prepapio Forli, Romagna, in the year 1883. So that's just a little over 20 years after the country had become unified. Not even like a generation after unification. His father was a blacksmith and a socialist. His mother was a school teacher. Mussolini was named Benito Amilcare Andrea Mussolini. His parents chose his names to honor prominent socialists. He was heavily influenced by his father's political views in his early life. He graduated from school and was a qualified elementary school teacher in 1901, which is something I didn't know until I did the research on this episode. In 1902, he left Italy for Switzerland in order to avoid the compulsory military service in Italy. He was unable to find consistent work while in Switzerland, and he was convicted in absentia for desertion in Italy. He would later take part in an amnesty for draft dodgers in exchange for agreeing to go ahead and serve in the army. And so he did that in 1904. He served his 2 years of military service, and he would return to teaching in 1906. He was still a heavy socialist, considered himself to be an intellectual, and wrote a number of socialist tracts and even co-authored a novel that was strongly anti-clerical, which he would later regret and would become taken out of circulation when he came to power. He became one of Italy's leading socialists in the 1910s. I haven't had any coffee today. He was slowly becoming disillusioned with socialism, though, and increasingly anti-egalitarian. Egalitarianism is the idea that all people are equal or should be treated equal under the law, and is a core tenet of socialism. So his losing faith in egalitarianism and starting to think that maybe there were some people who were, as it says in Animal Farm, some animals are more equal than others. At the start of the First World War, the socialists were opposed to Italy entering the war. This was a common thing at the beginning of the First World War. There were a lot of Americans who didn't want America to enter the war. Isolationist policies were really popular at the time. Mussolini's views were more aligned with the nationalists, and they were in favor of entering the war on the side of the Allies because they were hoping to take control of parts of the Austro-Hungarian Empire that had ethnic Italians, basically. His support was largely based on the hope that ethnic Italians could gain independence from the Habsburgs in Austria-Hungary. These views would get him expelled from the Socialist Party because they were anti-war and he was pro-war. So Mussolini founded his own party, the Fasci di Azione, Revolucionaria. They called themselves the Fascisti, or fascist. And I'm sorry for butchering the Italian. I have studied Italian, but Duolingo is not that great a teacher when it comes to Italian. I'm just going to say that, not sponsored. The Italian word fascismo derives from the Latin and essentially means a bundle of sticks. A bound bundle of sticks was an ancient Roman symbol that is also used in the U.S. I have a picture of it here next to me, if you're watching the YouTube video, not just listening to the podcast. It symbolizes how there is strength in unity, basically out of many, one. Mussolini would serve in the Italian army during the First World War. So that's his second stint in the army. After the war in 1918, he would call for a leader that was ruthless and energetic enough to make a clean sweep and revive the nation. In 1919, he would form the 200-member Fasci Italiani di Combattimento, or the Italian Combat Squad. Mussolini's key foreign policy idea was the concept of spazio vitale, or vital space, the idea that Italy was overpopulated and had a right to take land that had once been part of the Roman Empire away from the natives or lesser developed inhabitants. He believed he could end poverty in Italy by taking this vital space. Hitler would have a similar policy, and this policy is based on the so-called social Darwinism, the idea that some people are inherently stronger and therefore superior to other weaker people. While Benito's party was not as racist as Hitler's Nazi party, this idea is inherently racist. The idea that some people are more deserving than other people based on their ethnicity is racist. He also supported the idea that nations with low birth rates were doomed and that having a high birth rate showed strength. He believed that America was doomed because African Americans, who he saw as inferior, had a higher birth rate than European Americans. And he thought that they would outpopulate European Americans in a short period of time. One of Mussolini's followers, called Dino Grandi, would form militias of veterans that they called black shirts to restore order to the streets. These would clash with rival political groups like the socialists and the communists in the streets. The government did not interfere in these clashes or conflicts. So it's like gang warfare out there between the political factions. In 1921, Mussolini was elected to a seat in the Italian Chamber of Deputies. In October of 1922, around 30,000 black shirts gathered in Rome, demanding that the current prime minister resign. The elected government requested an order of martial law from the king, because the king had authority over the military, but the king refused. The prime minister did resign. The king thought that he could use Mussolini and his movement to prevent a communist revolution, which is a thing people were really afraid of because the Russians had had their communist revolution. Or maybe he was just trying to avoid the civil war in the relatively young country. But this was a mistake. Mussolini was now prime minister, but the fascists were still a minority in the government. They formed a coalition with the nationalists and the liberals. Mussolini's stated goal, however, was to have a totalitarian regime with him at its head. He passed legislation that favored the wealthy and landowning classes and disbanded labor unions. In 1923, he sent Italian forces into Corfu, which belonged to Greece. The international community, the League of Nations, could do nothing. Also, in 1923, a law called the Acerbo Law dramatically changed the way Italian elections were held. When a socialist politician, Giacomo Matteotti, I'm pretty sure I'm absolutely desecrating that name, complained about the election irregularities in the 1924 election, he was assassinated. The assassin would be imprisoned, but when he got out of prison, he admitted that Mussolini was actually responsible, so they put him back in prison. Under Mussolini, from 1925 to 1927, Italy would become a police state. Mussolini, having dismantled almost all legal limits on his power as prime minister, all local autonomy was dismantled and locally elected officials were replaced by state-appointed podestas. And ethnic Slavs living in Italian-controlled areas were persecuted and discriminated against. All right, so that's a lot, I know. I'm going to leave it off here for part 1 and pick up the rest in the next episode. If you learned something or enjoyed the episode, please like and subscribe. Remember, life is uncertain and full of nasty surprises. Take joy where you can find it, and I will see you all in the next episode. Thank you for listening and watching. Need to give a shout out to today's sponsor. Today's sponsored is Leopard Corp, quietly eating our customers' faces since 1980. Be sure to check out their annual and monthly subscription plans. You can get your face eaten either in one large bite once a year or several smaller bites once a month. Sign up at www.leopardco.blorb. That's www.leopardco.blorb.